The Parashah this week is number 38, Korach. This is Bamidbar, Numbers 16:1 through 18:32. This week we read about the rebellion of Korach against Moshe that is so applicable to today, as all of Torah is, that I hope that we walk away with a lesson on how to deal with people like him today. This event provides a conceptual illustration of the diversity of conflicts that we must face on a daily basis, both small and great. Korach was no ordinary troublemaker. He represents the unkosher nature of the pig. He appeared holy from his outward appearance. He was a Levite, one of the tribe consecrated by God for temple service. Korach was a leading member of the Kehathites, the most prestigious of the Levites. But like a pig, he was unclean and defiled on the inside. How is the pig unclean? It doesn't chew the cud. Okay. He was a coward, and like most cowards, he didn't act alone. You ever notice that? Yes. People who want something or try to get something, try to undermine you and get a bunch of people around them to support them. He went from tent to tent, soliciting a support base of 250 men of Israel, also leaders of the community. Korach's argument with Moshe was a selfish one, based on a socialistic government of which he wanted to be the head. Korach is regarded as the epitome of dissent and conflict. There are a couple of additional points to introduce regarding not only Korach, but leaders of communities and how we perceive them. This is so important. Don't be naive. Society always seems to be surprised when a pillar of the community or someone in a profession that we traditionally believe he or she chose because of an altruistic agenda, when they commit a crime, sometimes horrendous in nature, more often now than before. We can't fathom how such a conflict in what we believe about a person and his or her actions. But these occurrences should not be a surprise. The shortcoming is in us. It's our naivety in believing that everybody in a position that we believe is a trusted position, a policeman, clergy, nurse, doctor, whatever, where you entrust yourself into their care, is honest, because they're not. For example, there was a time when we could expect with reasonable certainty that policemen became policemen because they wanted to protect the public. However, I can cite incidents, numerous incidents, where certain individuals were just control freaks, or simply had a love of guns and obtained a sense of perceived prestige with a uniform, a gun, and a squad car. A second example is when the public learned about a number of Catholic clergy who had sex with young boys. How could that be? These little boys must be lying. But there were way too many, and God revealed it. This example provides a perfect illustration of misinterpreting Paul to one's own destruction. Just one example, 2 Peter 3:16. Furthermore, the Catholic Church subscribes to Paul's opinion over God's statement that it's not good that a person should be alone. Genesis 2:18. Remember that Paul was simply expressing an opinion and was not repeating a command. This is very, very important, and Christians don't think about that. And I want you to learn to think that way. What is Paul saying that's pure opinion, and what is he saying that's God's command? Yes, there are benefits to being alone. You're not distracted. But some people can't handle being alone, and they want that distraction. They just can't function unless they've got somebody around all the time. Okay? But he doesn't say don't get married. He also says if it burns within you, the desire to be intimate with somebody, have a relationship, get married. We can't fathom nurses or physicians who intentionally harm patients overtly or covertly. After all, people in these professions are supposed to have our best interest at heart. Closer to home, we as individuals should live as close to God's Torah, such that others can trust our words and actions. That we are honest in business, that we are honest with family, that we're honest in every transaction we have with every person. So no matter who gets together and talks about you later, and people will, their opinion would be consistent. that you were honest. We fail to consider that where we're living and who is allowed to roam free for a time, devouring who he may. We are living in an evil world, and thus Satan, Ha-Satan, is alive and well for the time being. Corrupt policemen, clergy, doctors, or anyone else in positions traditionally considered occupied by honest, loving, decent people are actually occupied by the people that come from the same society from which we live. There are some good people. There are many doctors, nurses, clergy, policemen, on and on and on, who are very honest, love what they do, and want to honor God by doing that particular job. But it's not everybody. These days, many people get into a position or a profession that is most available simply for a paycheck. So be aware, be careful. So it was with Korach. He was perceived as the epitome of the Levitical priesthood. He would have seemed sympathetic to Moshe if we believe the statement he made in Numbers 13:3. No, this is usually the case with someone who wants something from us: position, money, or other special treatment. The person or people trying to soften up the target, to make that individual believe that the wolf has an honest agenda. This is a reality frequently addressed in the past by Rosh Rebbe Milcom ben David, Rebbe. The Talmud proclaims, anyone who engages in divisiveness transgresses a divine prohibition, as it is written, and he shall not be as Korach and his company. We must explore the heart of Korach's contentions that provide this illustration of disunity and how it compares to those who would initiate such conflict today. Moshe had divided the people of Israel into several classes of holiness. And holiness in this context doesn't mean I'm better than you or you're better than him or her. It means separateness. There are classes of separateness, whether we like it or not. And you see the people didn't like it then. We don't like it now. We want to be at the top. Well, thanks to the Pope who's coming in September, he is advocating an agenda of poverty of everybody. He's against air conditioners. He's against corporate America. He's against affluence. He said we must be in intimate contact with the poor. There's an article in the Chronicle written about that today, as a matter of fact. So he's coming to address Congress in September with this agenda under the guise of environmentalist type attitude, protection of the environment. So just watch this. It's very interesting to see how all this is going to weave in and out and come together. Yeah. So this hierarchy that Moshe set up, it was set up and commanded by God, not Moshe. However, many times people ignore the message and kill the messenger. In contrast, Judaism teaches the opposite. We must ignore the messenger and evaluate the message for consistency with God's Torah before we apply it to our lives. This is a basic tenet of what I teach. Go check it out. Our Parashah discusses this concept. So Korach included Dasan and Aviram in his group of dissenters. Moshe summoned them to appear before him to discuss their complaints, but of course they don't show up. Let's see what they say. Isn't it enough that you took us out of a land of milk and honey? They're calling Egypt, the sinful lifestyle, a land of milk and honey, to cause us to die in the desert. Now you want to lord over us? You have not brought us to the land of flowing with milk and honey, nor did you give us a field and vineyard. Even if you would threaten to send someone to gouge out our eyes, we will not go up to you. Not only did these two individuals rebel against Moshe and Aharon as God's chosen leaders, they called Egypt a land of milk and honey. And they refused to ascend to Moshe to discuss their complaints. On a deeper level, these men rebelled against God and defiantly chose to hold Egypt and the associated sinful lifestyle above the land promised to the Israelites. Some people will wallow in the squalor. That's what they want to do. They're happy there. They quickly pointed the finger at Moshe for the sin of the spies and his failure to lead the Jewish people to conquer the land of Israel, not to mention accusing Moshe of lording over them for his own honor. Oftentimes people will accuse you of something. You can almost bet with 100% that the people that are accusing you of something are doing it themselves. Or they at least have that thought. Saying, oh, you can't, like Rebbe said, he used to paint nude figures, nude women. And he used to get a hard time about going down to the beach to do that. This was a life before I knew him. He wouldn't have done that with me. No way. Anyway, he was an artist. And people would talk about him saying, yeah, we know what you're going down there for. All these sexual innuendos. But they weren't. He loved shading. He loved the female figure. And he did a really good job. I wish you could have seen, some of the paintings that he had. And he sold them internationally. So that kind of thing, people accusing you of doing something, they're thinking about it.
That's right.
So don't let them transpose their shortcomings onto you.
He didn't sign a rabbi Davis, did he?
No. He wasn't a rabbi at that time. It's extremely important for us to examine Moshe's response for our own learning. Moshe was infuriated. However, Rashi explores this concept to reveal Moshe's grief at what was happening. How do we reconcile his anger and grief with a statement that he was the most humble of men? We can fast forward to Yeshua's reaction to the dishonest trading going on in the temple. That was corrupt trading, not the fact that they were selling those animals for sacrifices, because that's how that some people had to get them. But the animals weren't pure and they were overcharging. They were blemished sacrifices that God explicitly commanded against. That's what he got upset about. In Matthew 21:12 we read, Yeshua entered the temple grounds and drove out those who were doing business there, both the merchants and their customers. He upset the desks of the money changers, knocked over the benches of those who were selling pigeons. He said to them, "It has been written, my house will be called a house of prayer, but you are making it into a den of robbers." Yet Isaiah 53 speaks of Messiah, Yeshua's humility and servanthood. So we learn here that humility does not require meekness and passivity when dealing with people who are contesting and confronting God's Torah. I think you've seen me go off the deep end one time in here with somebody who would just not listen. And I'll do it again if that happens. There is a world of difference between those who exercise personal unbridled rage because of a perceived affront to their personal character, which Yeshua never did. It was always in defense of God's Torah. Our reactions should be grounded in hating what is happening rather than the person or persons. When somebody argues Torah who doesn't know what the heck's going on, and there's a congregation around, that can cause harm. And so it is not tolerated here. Will never be. If we hate the person, our response will be based on personal revenge. If we detest the evil action, as did Moshe and Yeshua in the examples, we will react with a strong desire to root out and address the evil behavior. Sometimes in the case of personal attacks on God's Torah, it's asking them to leave. There may be no physical difference between these two approaches from the outward action. Some people thought I was just really being mad. But I wasn't. I was defending a concept in God's Torah that that person did not understand and chose not to explore. In both cases, great battles will be required to fight evil that will at times require war and killing. But the difference of intent when confronting evil is significant. True believers feel pain and become distressed as we attempt to correct attempts by those who attack God's Torah through innumerable venues of sinful behaviors and insisting on misinterpretations of Scripture. But we must not allow our personal anger to permeate our judgment or our reaction. To react based on a personal agenda will never result in glorifying God, which is our sole purpose for living. Again, I quote Ecclesiastes 12:13. I send you there. There are 54 verses in the Bible that attest to this. And I encourage you to look them up. Look them up today, Shabbat. and prayerfully ponder them. Accordingly, Moshe's feelings are not personal against Korach and his followers. Moshe is distressed and he's saddened and he's depressed that these people have so quickly dismissed God's hierarchical structure for the people, and they decided they have a better way. Isn't that what's going on now? A better way. Let's make the whole world dependent on government. Government that will be a one world order. And then we can manipulate them like little puppets. Do as we say or we'll take your food. Do as we say, your kids won't have any education. Do as we say and we'll take your home. That's exactly where we're going. And for 3.5 years, it will seem relatively decent. Unemployment will change. Things will look like they're looking up. So says God's Torah. 3.5 years, there will be relative peace. But it's a pseudo-peace. And people are going to buy into it, and so are the Jews. They're going to think the anti-Messiah is the Messiah. That 3.5 year mark, bam, all comes together. Socialism without God at the head of the train will derail every time. We're witnessing the promotion of socialism in America today, already noting the descent of a nation that has removed God from every aspect of life. Moshe's approach was also based on the experience of Nadav and Avihu. Recall, they died the moment they brought fire pans with a foreign fire to Adonai against his protocol for worshiping him. Through the grace of Yeshua, some people are getting away with foreign fire right now. But trust me, they will not get away with it forever. They will be held accountable. You can bank on that. It's in Torah, over and over and over and over again. They might as well feel good and have a good time now, because it's not going to be fun forever. This test would be an effective way to see if God approved of Korach's argument. Adonai immediately intervenes with further direction to Moshe and Aharon. And I submit to you that his actions may have been different or non-existent had Moshe not reacted in the way that he did. How do I know? The incident where he struck the rock twice. He didn't get to go into the promised land. Note that Moshe even gave Korach and the others overnight to consider what they were doing. Haven't you had somebody in your family always tell you, think about it overnight. Don't go to bed angry. Cool down a little bit. Do we do it? No. We get mad. Shouldn't do that. Might not wake up in the morning to say you're sorry. So he gave him overnight. His reaction was not the knee-jerk type that we often exercise when we're confronted or offended. And this control takes time to develop. You're not going to develop it overnight. I still have problems with it. God commands Moshe to separate himself and Aharon from the rebellious assembly. Yet even so, Moshe interceded on behalf of the community of Israel, asking God if he's going to punish the entire assembly for the sin of one. This action illustrates how deeply ingrained Moshe's love and concern for the people was as their shepherd. Moshe takes an additional step to demonstrate to the community that God is the one who will deal with Korach and his followers. If you're being dealt with unjustly, again, you can trust with assurance that God will handle it in his time. Let it go. We must understand that there had never been an earthquake causing the ground to open up before this event. This was something new Moshe spoke of as a possible action. Not only does the ground open up and swallow Korach and his followers and their possessions, but a fire of judgment came out from Adonai and destroyed those 250 who were offering foreign fire. God does not tolerate foreign fire in any form. This narrative provides but one example. A religious service focused on dancing and singing rather than teaching God's Torah is a type of foreign fire. I don't care what you call it or what you say about how you try to justify, minimize, or rationalize it. It cannot be. Our mission here is to learn God's Torah and follow it to the best of our ability until we're taken. The incident of Korach provides an illustration of a man in one of the highest human roles spiritually and physically, falling to depths lower than those previously experienced by the people. Pride cometh before a fall, right? Big fall. We can juxtapose the situation. That means take it and just plop it right in the book of Revelation, looking at the description of Hasatan, his past, present, and destiny. He was the beautiful, most beautiful of angels. He was perfect. He was light, Lucifer, the angel of light. And yet, he wanted God's position. He wanted to be God. And he fell lower than anyone. And a third of the angels went with him. Even so, the above events were not enough to correct the stiff-necked attitudes of the people. Talk about hard-headed. Even the brass covering designed by Eleazar for the altar to remind the people against bringing foreign fire wasn't any help. The very next day, the whole community complained against Moshe and Aharon, blaming them for Korach's demise. At this point, I just want to throw up my hands and say, I'm done. I'm out of here. Mm-hmm. Now, God was really angry, and he planned to destroy them all at once. Who could blame Moshe if he'd have said, go ahead, I'm tired of dealing with these rebellious people? As a devoted servant of Adonai, however, he was able to transcend his feelings. He sent Aaron to make atonement for them. And Aharon ran to the middle of the assembly with his fire pan, even though God already exacted a plague that was killing the people. Aharon added the incense and made atonement for the people, standing between the dead and the living, and the plague was stopped. So let us examine this event in the context of our Kohen Hagadol, Yeshua. He descended from heaven. He became human. He interceded between the dead and the living, the dead being those who are anti-Torah. Those who choose to be reconciled to God are the living, or will become living. And the mandatory death indictment for original sin, that plague stopped. God knew the inner dissension and envy among the people were still present, even after the earthquake and the plague. Again, we can look at Revelation and see the stubbornness of people, even though they're being burned, bit by scorpions, all of these things. They will curse God. This time he interceded for Moshe and Aharon without their asking. He was going to put an end to the argument about who should be in charge, but in a way that we might not expect. Never does God act in a way that I expect, because I can't expect according to his thought processes. I don't know that. I don't know his mind. Okay? So it's always a surprise. And then we look back and go, I could have had a V8, you know. Now, he didn't handle it in a way that mercenaries and radical zealots would handle things. That's one of my fears for people who love this country, if you will. That's the agenda that they are going to do all of this under, gathering all their weapons and loading up, lock and loading and getting ready to blow away whoever comes, We've got to be very, very careful. There's one thing to defend your home and your family. It's another thing to just do it because you can and be mad about something else. I guarantee you that probably 99% of these people are not following God's Torah. Okay? So we've got to be very careful when we start listening to people or following people who are planning on stocking up weapons and ammunition to be sort of a militia or a Minuteman group or whatever you want to call them. Because God says it's not by might nor power but by my Spirit. So we have to be careful. Similar to the events by which Elijah discovered the still small voice of God, as Adonai chose to work through buds, flowers, and ripened almonds. And this is significant. It all happened at once. Aharon's staff was the one that budded with a complete life cycle of the almond tree. And this demonstrates the power of God to transcend time and other laws of nature. The staff was to remain in view, lest the people forget God's choice as their Kohen Gadol. Their Kohen Gadol at that time being Aharon. and no other. Our haftarahs in 1 Samuel. The prophet Samuel, who was a descendant of Korach, gathers the Jews to attend the installation of Saul as the king of Israel. During the address to the people, Samuel shouts, "Here I am. Bear witness against me before God and before his anointed, whose ox I did not take, or whose ass did I take, or whom did I rob, or whom did I oppress, or from whose hand did I take a bribe?" And this is compared to Moshe's statement in the Parashah, "I have not taken a donkey from a single one of them, and I have not harmed a single one of them." The nation gathered at Gilgal for a second coronation of King Saul because the first one didn't have a convincing census. They offered sacrifices and they rejoiced. Samuel then asked the people to testify that he never committed crimes against the people, and they confirmed it. He told the people how God saved and led them every step of the way on their journey, and chastised them for wanting a tangible king over God as their sovereign ruler. It's not been good since. It's been going downhill ever since. We're witnessing the results of this request today more than ever before. He assures them that even though his is not a wise choice to want a human king, God will be with them if they follow his commands, his statutes, and his laws. He also reminds them of what will happen if they choose to go their own way. The world is just beginning to experience the results of our rebellion against God's Torah. As a confirmation to the people that Samuel's not speaking in his own authority, he asked God to send a thunderstorm, although it's not the season for storms. God confirms it with a storm, and the people ask Samuel to intercede for them and have God stop the storm. The ending of this haftarah expresses that we must ingrain in our minds and constantly demonstrate through our thoughts and actions, because God will not forsake his people for his great name's sake. For God has sworn to make you a people for himself. This is our hope and comfort that we must cling to at the end times progress towards the tribulation. Our Brit Kadeshah is in 2 Timothy 2, 8 through 21. This letter is one of encouragement from Paul to Timothy, who's younger in the faith than Paul, and he's discouraged because of the constant arguing and needless babbling among those who profess to be following Messiah. We read in 2 Timothy 2:12, "If we have died with him," Messiah, Yeshua, "we," future, "also live with him. If we persevere, we will also rule with him." We will also. We're not ruling with him now. "If we disown him through our thoughts and behaviors, he will also disown us. If we are faithless, he remains faithful, for he cannot disown himself." Keep reminding the people of this and charge them solemnly before the Lord not to engage in word battles. Well, how about that? They accomplish nothing useful and are a catastrophe for the hearers, just as I was talking about. People causing dissension within a body of believers. There are people who are going to listen just to see if there's something of interest to them. We should walk away. Do all you can to present yourself to God as someone worthy of his approval, as a worker with no need to be ashamed, because he deals straightforwardly with the word of the truth. But keep away from godless babbling, for those who engage in it will only become more ungodly, and their teaching will eat away at the people like gangrene. You ever seen gangrene? Not pretty. The Lord knows his own, and let everyone who claims he belongs to the Lord stand apart from wrongdoing. This passage echoes the Parashah once again, validating the truth and reliability of the Old Testament and its applicability to today. The sins of Hymenaeus, Alexander, and Philetus spoken of in 1 and 2 Timothy were that these men spoke against a physical resurrection. They considered it figuratively or metaphorically. That is, the only resurrection was from ignorance to truth or from sin to righteousness. Their teaching in the assembly divided the people, just as people who teach against Yeshua as the Messiah do in so-called messianic synagogues, where the people are not grounded well enough in Torah to rebuke these individuals or have rabbis who are afraid of confrontation for the sake of upholding God's Torah. This type of fear is exactly what Paul is addressing with Timothy. Paul was no pussy willow, as he turned them, Hymenaeus and Alexander, over to the adversary so that they will learn not to insult God. Today we hear all kinds of comments about people's frustrations and their fears about being watched. And indeed we are. You think you got anything private anymore? Forget it. Wake up. Your medical records are sent to the insurance companies who are run by the government. So don't think that your encounters with physicians or any other healthcare provider is private, because it's not. I submit to you that we should not be as concerned about that as we should be about our priority of being judged by the one, capital O, who is watching the entire world. The thoughts and the actions of every living creature, for which he will one day judge rightly. That's what we should be concerned about. Not by the government. We know it's corrupt. We know bad things are going to happen. Put your energy with being concerned about what you think and what you say and what you do. That's where it counts. Shabbat shalom. Okay.